Welcome everyone to our first spring event at the Center for African and African American Studies. Thank you for your flexibility, and especially to Professor Nanya Jahanara Kabir, who graciously and promptly rescheduled with us after the chaos of last week's winter storm. I personally want to thank her for reaching out, checking in, and being so understanding about the need to reschedule. My name is Margarita Castroman, and I'm an assistant professor of English and an affiliate faculty member with CAS, the Center for African and African American Studies. And I will be introducing our distinguished guest today. Following her remarks, Professor Daniel Dominguez will be moderating the Q&A, so feel free to post your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen at any point during the talk. It's one of the benefits of Zoom that you can sort of figure that question out in real time. He will be gathering those and then helping to lead the conversation after the talk. He will also provide us with some updates about upcoming CAS events that you won't want to miss. And so without further ado, after a week of much ado, it is my honor to introduce Professor Ananya Jahanara Kabir, a professor of English literature at King's College London. Professor Kabir has also taught at the universities of Leeds, Cambridge, and UC Berkeley. She received her own academic training from the universities of Calcutta, Oxford, and Cambridge, where she was the recipient of a prize fellowship from Trinity College for her postdoctoral work. Professor Kabir researches the intersection of the written text with other forms of cultural expression within acts of memorialization and forgetting. Recently, issues around the market and cultural heritage have also joined earlier interests in the relationship of creativity to conflict. Through an ERC Advanced grant, she led an investigation into African heritage social dance and music across language worlds, a testament to a career as interdisciplinary as it is multilingual. She works with a range of languages: English, Bengali, Hindi, Spanish, German, French, Portuguese, enjoys decoding various creoles, and is currently learning Dutch. For her innovative work in the humanities, in 2017, Professor Kabir received India's most prestigious and academic recognition, the Infosys Humanities Prize, and in 2018, the Humboldt Research Prize. She is the author of Paradise, Death and Doomsday in Anglo-Saxon Literature, Territory of Desire, representing the Valley of Kashmir, and Partitions, Post-Amnesias, 1947, 1971, and Modern South Asia. Her latest projects include Alegropolitics, connecting on the Afromodern dance floor, which we get to hear more about today, and Creole Indias, a research project that explores transoceanic creolization through cultural production, connecting the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean worlds. In May 2020, she co-founded with writer Ari Gauthier the cultural platform Latinae Creole on Facebook, which showcases their vision of a multicultural, plural, and creolized Indic space. Please join me and Cass in welcoming Professor Nanya Jahanara Kabir, who will actually start her talk with a video of a dance performance that will last roughly 4 minutes.
Thanks for bearing with me, everybody, while we watch that little show. I'll talk about it in a second. But thank you, of course, to my gracious hosts. And thank you to all of you who've turned up, even though it's such a turbulent time. Of course, we don't know where people are joining us from physically in this moment of virtual connection. Levántense y gocen que la vida es corta. Alégrense. Por fin que lo demás no importa. Rise up and take pleasure because life is far too short. Be joyful because in the end, the rest doesn't matter at all. This is my translation of the refrain from Gloria Estefan's Ayer, or Yesterday. Well, let me start by taking us back to a pre-pandemic yesterday, a time before this unending moment of stasis, lockdown, and lack of travel, of mobility, and of dance. Or so we would like to remember it as. On the 2nd of October, 2019, I was flying from Manchester, where I live, to Berlin to attend the Berlin Salsa Congress for the 9th consecutive year. This has been an important field site for my research. Instead of exiting Tegel Airport to start a semester on sabbatical in Berlin, kicked off by this now annual fall ritual of a weekend of dancing, meeting friends, and sharing my research with fellow dancers, I was refused entry into Germany. There appeared to be an anomaly in my Schengen visa. I was commanded to return to the United Kingdom, where I've been living as an Indian citizen for over 2 decades. Sitting in the Tegel Airport police station, waiting for the next available flight back and clutching forlornly my bag of sparkling dance shoes, I felt keenly, and for the first time within a relatively privileged life, the immediate consequences of this sudden restriction of mobility. An arbitrary dispensation of power exercised on my body was dictating when and how I could move. That the abrogation of this freedom was cutting me off from hundreds of salsa dancers congregated in Berlin through their exercise of the same freedom was, however, a supremely productive irony. It was, after all, this absolute power exerted by the plantation on the body of the enslaved that gave rise to the expressive practices of the circum-Atlantic world. Salsa, as one of these practices, derives historically from popular responses to enslavement. Infusing the protocols of European couple dances in partnerhold with the kinetic and rhythmic repertoires of Central and West Africa, salsa enacts a history of overt compromise with and covert resistance to the work of power over the body. Through the capitalist machine, it emerged as an embodied expression of collective and defiant joy. Rise up, be joyful, take pleasure in the moment. Welcome to the party, which is the title of the piece that you just saw. To those of you who are here listening to me, this connection between my detention at Fortress Europe, the distant past of enslavement, and our enjoyment of the dance floor may seem far-fetched. But let me press the pause button and rewind to the Berlin Salsa Congress of 2002, where the now legendary salsa dancers from New York, Frankie Martinez and Aisha Koswara, made their first European debut, and that's the clip you saw. As the Congress looked forward in 2019 to its 20th anniversary in 2022, which of course no one knew then would not come to pass at all in the manner we envisaged because of the pandemic, the blurred and amateurish video clip that is the sole audiovisual record of their performance at this festival in 2002 began circulating on social media, and that's where I've extracted it from you today. Welcome to the party, the clip announces, taking its title from the music Frankie and Aisha danced to, a jazzy Afro-Cuban track from 1969 by the Har-U Percussion Orchestra, a community group that began life as Harlem Youth Unlimited in the wake of the Harlem riots of 1964. The track is wordless, as is the dance performance, but its 4 minutes or so condense the history of how Afro-Latin and African American rhythms and movements come together in uptown Manhattan, where Harlem and Spanish Harlem press up against each other. And here emerge from the 1940s onwards the sounds and moves of crossover dance genres. The pachanga, the boogaloo, mambo, hustle, all these genres find their moment of glory in Frankie and Aisha's dance routine, which also incorporates predecessors such as the Charleston and Cuban rumba. While ostensibly presenting a salsa performance, then, the intention is to pay homage to the dance culture of the connection and the politics of Harlem, and indeed, therefore, of New York. The studied casualness of the performance is repeatedly ruptured and restored through razor sharp, high speed dancing, alternating with segments where they trace the perimeter of the stage with swag and with strut. Welcome to the party. Alegrense. Enjoy yourselves, as Gloria Estefan says, because ultimately nothing is more important, she says, than that. But as Estefan's official video of the song Ayer shows, accompanying this call to enjoy yourself is the memory of diaspora, revolution, rupture, departure, and arrival once again. And yet, Rakatakata, kukumpra, ya los cueros te llaman, the drums call you, they are calling you. This knowing immersion in alegría, the decisive drawing of resources for survival from a community that moves together to known, remembered, and remastered rhythms. This is what I call Alegropolitics. In Frankie and Aisha's ironic, funky, and stylish recollection of New York dance history on a European dance floor, in their transposition of the party to the stage that showcases the transhistorical dance floor on an actual dance floor, in their brown, Nuyorican, Indonesian, Japanese bodies affiliating themselves to the history of American Black vernacular dance, and in my own recollection of that performance, as I recollected my inability to travel to dance, and in my recollection today of that recollection as we gather virtually during a pandemic, in all this is the move from Alegria to Alegropolitics. So from 2013 to 2018, I directed a large research project on African heritage social dance and its transnational history. And this project sought to answer a simple question. How did dance and music, born out of the deepest trauma and deracination that the modern world has seen, the very dark birth of capitalism itself and the horrors of the Middle Passage, how did this dance and music come to furnish modernity with a fundamental and ubiquitous form of pleasure, going out to dance? Lost in music, I feel so alive, I quit my 9 to 5. What is this feeling alive that derives from the extreme violation of sovereignty that was the enslaved on the plantation? In finding ways to theorize this discomforting but unmistakable genealogy that makes the embodied joy of the modern dance floor an Afromodern dance floor, and I don't actually, in the talk I construct today from my work, I don't actually explain the Afromodern dance floor. So if anybody wants to press me more on that in the question and answer session, I'd be very delighted. So I coined the term for the dance floor that I discuss and I enjoy and I'm part of. I coined the term Alegropolitics, and this actually is a riff on Achille Mbembe's celebrated term necropolitics. The particular kind of Alegropolitics I focused on is that condensed in social dances that utilize this partner whole derived from European dance, together with kinetic and rhythmic repertoires of, as I said, Central and West Africa, particularly Bakongo. And these are things actually that people like Robert Farris Thompson have detailed in great, and others like Brenda Gottschall Dixon, Tommy de France. People have put together repertoires of what they call, this African, Africanity in dance. So that Africanity condenses with the partner whole, say, of the waltz, very clear example, to create certain repertoires of African heritage partner dances. And these constitute a distinct category within Black Atlantic expressive practices that were generated through processes of creolization as demotic responses to asymmetric operations of power. And many such partner dances have existed. I named some while I was describing the dance performance we saw. But these are all vernacular social forms that thrive transnationally today on dance floors worldwide. You will experience salsa in Korea, South Korea, kizomba in India. You know what I mean? They're everywhere. Not just Europe, which is where I started my talk from, because that's where I'm located. Some genres are well known globally, such as salsa and kizomba. Others have died out a bit, like machixe, Brazilian machixe. Others enjoy local traction. For example, very many Brazilian forms, techno brega, etc. All have developed in symbiosis with music genres, which sometimes, often, but not always, have the same name as the dance genre in question. It is indeed a civilization paradox that the absolute power exercised by the plantation system on the bodies of enslaved people should have given rise to this profusion of dances, in particular the dances in partnerhold that have emerged since the late 19th century. And the paradox deepens when we realize that it is capitalism's neoliberal machinery that offers channels for the continued but unpredictable transnational proliferation today of several of these dances within semi-formalized leisure industries. Of course, we have to remember that at this moment, these industries are taking a battering because of the pandemic. And again, if people want to talk about this, what's happening to these dance, the dance floor in the pandemic moment, I would be delighted to address it later. But the proliferation in normal times relates in complex ways to the democratization of leisure enabled by specific historical factors, naturally including migrations to and movement between the cities of the Atlantic littorals, not merely after the abolition of slavery, but in the wake of the world wars, decolonization, the Cold War, the technological capture of the musical genres that correspond to these dance forms, and their commodification that has proceeded in a kind of dialectical tension with the interracial relationships that gave rise to these dances in the first place. Indeed, these partner dances are touchstones of global modernity's intricate relationship to these traumatic processes: enslavement, colonialism, extractive capitalism. While enacting on one level cultural compromise, because it is a European style partner dance with Africanity infused in it, they are equally embodied and mobile archives, kinetoscapes of newness and expressivity that arise in resistance to cultural deracination. So, if these dances embody both compromise and resistance, it is really because of their structure. Because at a kinetic level, this structure actually brings together two people in improvised communication on the basis of both of them possessing a certain rhythmic and musical shared literacy appropriate to the dances concerned. And this is really what I mean when I say it's a protocol of partner dance. So, what does this entail? There's a partnered couple, that's the dancing unit, where one person, usually a man, leads and the other, usually a woman, follows. Their synchronization is ensured by a shared knowledge on several levels. There's a basic repertoire of steps, some specific to leaders, others to followers, which enables each to generate a kinetic structure that incorporates the other. So this visually translates into a form of mirroring. There's an understanding which is shared of the rhythmic basis of the music. There's a mutual comprehension of nonverbal cues through which the leader initiates displacement, return, and movement through the dancing space, while, of course, mindful of other dancers. It's a party, remember, there are lots of people dancing, so you can't bump into each other. And the follower is responding all the time and initiating a push-pull motion. The smooth and playful give and take of information, triangulated with the music's demands, generates a process which is summed up in the concept of connection, which is the sum of the forces which hold together and propel this dancing couple as a unit through the dance floor. And given that our dances are improvised social acts, this quality of the connection is extremely important in ensuring a pleasurable dancing experience. Now, this imperative of improvisation transforms this European protocol of partnerhold, as well as European time signatures that structure the rhythm at a musical level. As a result, this spatial and temporal structure can combine polyrhythm, polycentrism, body isolation, and syncopation, all these features that are features of Africanity. Through creolization, then, because this is for me very important, creolization I analyze, it's a process. I'm not talking about whether people are Creole, whether they call themselves Creole, whether they identify as Creole. No, I'm talking about a process which I call creolization, which I really find is the motor of Alegropolitics. This creolization enables embodied cultural knowledges carried by European and African descended people to the Americas. And this is how these knowledges merge to give rise to the spectrum of partner dances, which are differentiated to the extent to which the dance in question invokes its kinesthetic African heritage or disguises it. And this is why you see that tango, people look at it and say, where's the Africanity there? Where's the percussion? But if you look closely, if you dance the tango, you know where it's gone to. And then there's something like salsa, something like kizomba. All these dances exhibit Africanity in different ways. So this is the sliding signifier, if you like, of the Afro in Afro-Latin and Afro-diasporic. Of course, you might well say, why are we, if we are thinking about creolization, where there are different things in the mix, Afro, Euro, everything, why are we calling it African heritage partner dances? Why can't we just call them or Afromodern? Why do we privilege the Afro? Well, it's very simple, resistance, right? We have to, because we have to honor that history through which these dances came about and through which these dances emerged as embodied forms of resistance. So even the fact that this African heritage is either foregrounded or camouflaged through the flexible resources of these creolized dances means that this is resistance. This is the heritage that gives dancers an affective vocabulary for somatically remembered aspects of identities lost, alienated, fragmented, and yet powerfully capable of inciting subversion and rebellion. This is the vocabulary that is the physical correlative of an idea of Africa that haunts these dances, their music, and the habitus that accrues around them, often mediated, of course, through Afro-diasporic religious systems and the political, spiritual importance of drumming. At the same time, it is the European frame of partnerhold, always a defining feature of these dances, and its graphic equivalent, which is the musical score, that smuggle these somatic traces of Africanity into the realm of mainstream entertainment, leisure, and pleasure. Through rhythmic and kinetic epistemes, the African heritage of populations displaced through slavery and deracinated through colonialism interjects within European and music and dance forms to recodify them. And therefore, these traces are never neutral. They're never ornamental. They are reservoirs of collective memory that can activate at different times and places this imagined Africa. So, conducted through the partner hold, our dances are acts of memory. They neither hold out the promise of a return to origins, it's the party, it's happening in the there and the now, nor do they plangently or melancholically declare the impossibility of return. That's why it's Alegropolitics. Rather, they activate African heritage within the structures of creolization to celebrate survival and enact hope through acts of connection. The dancing body, therefore, is the production of what Jacqueline Couty, your colleague at Rice, has called the habitation plantation as contact zone, where the brutal confrontation of cultures and peoples, a confrontation in which one group sought to dominate the other, set in motion the chaotic and unpredictable process known as creolization, unquote. But actually, this dancing body, and indeed the dance of two, this couple, is itself the contact zone, where the resources of polyrhythm are marshaled to register in synchronicity diverse kinetic histories. Barbara Browning wrote very well about this in her book on samba. Even while bearing witness to a capacity to transform the violence of encounter by becoming the record of that encounter. So it's true that, as I just mentioned samba, these statements hold true for the gamut of social dances that arose through creolization in the Atlantic Rim. But actually, I find the partner dance form that most eloquently expresses the creolizing encounter because it brings two people together in contact, you see. So the heteronormative expectations of the leader-follower paradigm, on the one hand, can be seen as a capitulation of sorts to this kind of modernity's defining collusion of patriarchy and capitalism, but I think they are better understood as a ceaseless performance of confrontation, negotiation, and grappling, literally manifested in the labile interconnection of torsos and rhythms and limbs as people dance together in this twosome. So it's serious play. It's serious play between the demands for compromise and the subtlety of resistance. It's a teleological quest for an ending, which is nevertheless held in perpetual balance. So we never have the ending. And in all this, I have been very influenced really by Diana Taylor's foundation scenarios that do not reduce, I quote her, gestures and embodied practices to narrative description. So an understanding of African heritage partner dances through Taylor's argument for the scenario, I quote, as meaning-making paradigm that structures social environments, behaviors, and potential outcomes in the Americas, unquote, really helps me advance to you this understanding of partner dances. But there's one important difference between her theorization of scenarios and mine, and this brings me back to the dance floor. She is talking about the stage, and I'm talking about the dance floor. Our dancers move on the dance floor. Even when you saw Frankie and Aisha dancing, they were paying homage to the dance floor, right? Because they were talking about the party. What I want to point out is that on the dance floor, different units of two dancing these partner hold dances spontaneously and in an improvised way reenact the sexual and racial violence inextricable from creolization, while seizing opportunities of improvised communication to convert that foundational violence into some sort of way of surviving through what Taylor calls reversal, parody, and change, unquote. Participating in the use of masquerade and subterfuge that characterizes performance cultures of the Atlantic Rim, as Joseph Roach has shown us. Our social dances, nevertheless, do not need the pomp and ceremony of carnival costumes to tap into those rich resources. You saw how simply and in an everyday fashion Aisha and Frankie were dressed. The swag is in the strut itself. Value and meaning are generated through the partner hold itself as enabler of mimesis. Facing each other and playing with the beat, the dancing couple commemorates, subverts, parodies, and transmits culture through intersubjective mimicry and mirroring. Wherever in the world this dancing couple moves, they're moving autonomously and yet in the pull of other people's rhythms. And this is the move I want to make. I appreciated very much the flyer that was created for my talk, where we saw two recognizably African-American bodies dancing. And we understand that genealogy when we see these bodies dancing the dance that is their history. But what happens when this dance is danced by other people, by people like me? I have no genetic connection to that history. What am I doing? I do believe from my long research on the dance floor, observing people dancing these dances, both in the Americas and outside, I do believe that something somatic is transmitted. That is an act of affiliation rather than necessarily appropriation. And again, I'll be more than delighted to explore these issues and to rise to the challenge of walking that tightrope between these issues. They are difficult issues, but I think we must find a way to look for affiliation, to look for solidarity. And it is in the dance floor that I see this happening. So on the dance floor, we then can acknowledge a history that the bodies transmit, not verbally, not narratively, but through these kinetic repertoires. This is the kinetic history that returns to Black dancers striving to connect to each other through a defiantly joyous reclaiming of what Saidiya Hartman called in Wayward Lives the disavowed geography of the world, the barracoon, the hold, the plantation, the camp, the reservation, the garret, the colony, the attic studio, the bedroom, the urban archipelagos, the ghetto, and the prison, unquote. It is a history that Hartman has excavated in that marvelous book of hers, with empathy and elan, from the perspective of those wayward Black girls who arrived after emancipation to Northern American cities, staking their claim to modernity, determined to escape what she calls the marriage plot, daddy, mommy, and child, existence on her knees, intent on making a new life possible. That is Alegropolitics, and that is what I am claiming, or I'm asserting, that somehow when the moment is right, when the connection is good, there is a somatic transfer of that history non-verbally to dancers dancing these dances all over the world, whether or not they actually have that genetic filiation. It is an act of affiliation on the Afromodern dance floor. Saidia Hartman closes her book with an account of these girls congregating in Harlem's cabarets, where she quotes, on the dance floor, they refused the world that refused them, unquote, and where it was clear, quote, that existence was not only a struggle, but a beautiful experiment too, unquote. Pushing back the edges of photographs and other documents from the attempted archival capture of precarious Black lives, Hartman's prose conjures up the way in which girls move in what she calls the broken circle of the dance floor as they ready to get free. And as she says, we see that little something, that improvisation of becoming together. These are Hartman's words. That call to assembly, that two-step and slide, announcing the struggle against an imposed life, the sensual embrace of a body unmarked by stigma and undisciplined by servitude, unquote. Yet Hartman does more than make us imagine these characters, these women, dancing in polyrhythmic call and response that rift off the energy pulsing from the streets of Harlem, exemplifying the vitality of the ordinary. Her words again. She reminds us, I quote, all those sweaty bodies gathered on the floor that sought escape from the dull routine of work and the new forms that, fleeing the plantation, the practice of bodies in motion, inadvertently choreographed, that was a call to freedom, unquote. So Hartman intensely focused on the women caught up in this time of the dance as time of freedom. But one thing she doesn't do is she does not unpack the full significance of dancing in complicity with a partner, be that partner man or woman. And this I do want to emphasize because that is the collusion of patriarchy and capitalism, that the dancing couple has come to be quite uniformly identified with a leader who is a man and a follower who is a woman. This terminology is not necessarily that which we must uncritically adhere to, and neither must we assume that only a man and a woman can be a partnerhood. When two women dance together, and as we know historically, two men dance together in the prehistory of the tango, this is eminently a dancing duo doing the creolized protocols of the partner dance that I'm talking about. So the main thing is to understand is that there is a precarious complicity of making vulnerable the self to a dance partner, be whatever gender they are, or whatever combination of genders the partnership is. This is precisely the point where autonomy and surrender orbit each other. The equipoise of partner dance and the dynamism of improvised yet structured connection stretch the point out across the duration of the song. In this balancing act, we find a meta-history of creolization itself as the unexpected, even miraculous creation of exhilarating cultural resources out of violent encounters and brutal histories of repression and dehumanization. And here I go to Ralph Michel Trouillot's call to analyze the miracle of creolization. Actually, he says creolization is a miracle begging for analysis. So I heed his call. Now, where we might find the body, we might expect the body to capitulate and to reject the other by closing ranks. I am not going to open myself out to the other because I must protect myself. Instead, we find new vocabularies of self-fashioning through collaborative survival, and Alegropolitics, as I call it, of the dance floor that remakes the self through taking on and improvising the kinetic equivalents of Europe's so-called civilizing mission. African heritage partner dances register the power of parody, of mimicry, of a strategic essentialism, and what even Homi Bhabha calls sly civility, all tactics elaborated within post-colonial theory, but somehow evaporated on a wholly discursive and verbal level. There is no body in post-colonial theory of Homi Bhabha, honestly. Rather, we need to go back to the body on the dance floor to see how enjoyment and pleasure create a performative weaponry of the dispossessed. This weaponry offers resources for this wayward self-making that Saidia Hartman talks about. It offers it to a range of people who, constricted by labels and routines of neoliberal capitalism, choose to perform an affiliative Afromodernity through social dance. Why is our music so contagious? Asked Richard Wright in 1941. Why is it that those who deny us are so willing to sing our song? Perhaps, he says, it is because so many of us who live in cities feel deep down just as we feel. unquote. Attempts to explicate what is often called rather blithely the contagious nature of Black music and dance must remain vigilant to the economic and ethical consequences of cultural appropriation as a responsibility and duty towards the historical burdens of modernity we are all implicated in. But we cannot ignore the psychosocial domain pinpointed by Wright when we seek to understand why, without or with genetic affiliation to African heritage, people the world over are pulled towards its performative expressions. If the birth of the racial subject, says Achille Mbembe, and therefore of blackness with a capital B, is linked to the history of capitalism, it is indeed in the stylized gestures that he talks about that disclose what is at stake. This is when the matter of life returns as an open question, unquote, Achille Mbembe. This challenge to the system through an improvised vocabulary of self-styling is what Madison Moore has theorized as the fabulous. And it is this art of being fabulous, created in duress, born out of racialization, that throws out a lifeline, a gift whose reception goes beyond racialized distinctions. I have found, Moore declares, that the people most likely to do fabulous performance are either those who, although well off, feel hemmed in by conservative conditions, or alternatively, those who have in some way faced historically conditioned systemic oppression, unquote. The African heritage partner dances I've talked about today, and which I opened with a little clip of, these are resources bringing together people in rhythmic affinity in the anonymous yet pulsating streets of the Atlantic Rim city, punishing in its demands for labor and conformity, and yet trembling with possibilities for self-styling through recourse to histories written on the body through gesture. These partner dances bridge the gap between Madison Moore's recognition that fabulousness is always an embrace of yourself when you're constantly reminded that you don't deserve to be embraced. So this is Madison Moore talking about the need to embrace oneself. But the dances I'm talking about, which are partner dances in which you embrace another person, they bring us from Madison's observation to Marta Savigliano's perspicacious question in the context of tango. Whose embrace was the tango embrace? Our dancers instantiate a mutual embrace amidst the alienations of modernity, relaunching through the touch of the other the forms of reciprocity without which there can be no progress for humanity. As demotic sources of healing, the racial and class displacement provoked by urbanization, by war, these are Marta Savigliano's observations, to which I will add gendered violence as well, because when you have an insistence on a man and a woman dancing in a heteronormative partner hold, we do also recall gendered violence. In all these resources, the African heritage partner dance competed, according to Marta Savigliano, talking about tango, competed for a place of its own amongst the dances that were already danced, pending, as always, benediction in the cultural empires of the world, unquote. Yet, what makes the status of African heritage social dances, partner dances, such as the tango, what makes its status as vernacular knowledge useful was the part that it played in the endless labor of reparation. And this is again an idea I take from Achille Mbembe. The need to acknowledge the labor of reparation. Our creolized dances of two represent the Afro-Atlantic vernacular gone global through kinetoscapes that bypass the stamp of high cultural benediction. As systems of exchange, reciprocity, and mutuality for sharing the world with other beings, and this is also from Achille Mbembe's work on his recent work, our dances affirm, when the connection is right, that our vocation to survive depends on making the desire for life a shared desire. And this is also the cornerstone, or should be a cornerstone, of a new way of thinking about politics, about culture, and of course, about the dance. Thank you very much.
Super. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Kabir. Thank you very much, Dr. Castroman. Hello, everyone. I am Daniel Dominguez, Associate Professor of History at Rice. It is my pleasure to moderate the Q&A session. If you have a question, please send it to us by using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Okay. Dr. Kabir, you asked us to press you on the issue of the Afro-modern dance floor. So Dr. Jacqueline Couture is asking, could you expand on your idea of the modern dance floor and couple partner dancing in contrast to the individual dance in the middle of a circle during from Nick and Guadeloupe? She's particularly interested in the importance of spaces and bodies in your discussion.
Yes. That's a brilliant, really important, useful question. Thank you, Jacqueline. And of course, it's so wonderful that we are here together. We've been on dance floors together, really together as well. So hopefully that moment will happen again, not in the too distant future. Now, there is a very interesting genealogy between the dances you talk about, these circle dances. You mentioned the goka and the ballet from your part of the Caribbean, but of course there are many others, tumba, francesa. You know, there are so many circle dances which basically are often pan-Caribbean-like, relegated more or less to the realm of folklore. You know, even in Spanish, you would call it folklorico, you know. So this idea of folklore is a very useful hook to understand the relationship between the spectrum of dances that develop through the, you know, Black Atlantic, you know, kind of matrix, and how they've got differently enmeshed with capitalism. So what I have actually discovered or unearthed, traced, and argued through research that starts with these circle dances and goes all the way to the partner dances, I see these as actually some kind of a spectrum. Now, because our dances don't exist in a teleology, again, that some died out and then others arose, if they died out or if they became popular, there are random or, you know, very specific reasons. It's not about a dance that was initiated at a certain point in time that became redundant. No. So, for example, we have side-by-side dances like the circle dances. However, just imagine, Jacqueline, if we went to a dance, if we went to a nightclub, it is quite difficult to dance. We can break into a circle, for sure. Every now and then we see that happening, particularly if you are playing music with a real connect to Africanity in the rhythm. People will break out of partner hold and reassemble in a line or a circle and have the alegria becoming a group alegria before it dissipates back into the couple dance. We know this. A good DJ will always do that, you know. So even in specific dance forms, like say in Cuba, in the Cuban context, you have despelote, you have all these things that started. Another very important moment, which is scandalous in the Caribbean context, when people dance back to front, you know, that is bad. It's not, you know, it's socially, it's risque. So there are all these ways in which the bodies regroup, you know, vis-a-vis each other. The creolized partner dance facing each other is the politest expression. And that's why it got marketized and enmeshed in capitalism the easiest. Moreover, it is fairly easy to find one dance partner and dance with them in the course of this, you know, of an evening of say, dancing salsa. What was the intermediary? That is what I've traced. Between the circle dances you're talking about, where you had the first formation of the couple in the center of the circle. You can see so many depictions of slave dances on plantations where you have that moment. And this is a moment that we can't actually, while the European couple hold allows you to imagine connection through hands, there is another connection, which is the connection of the belly, you know, the connection of the forehead. These are the connection even of your pelvic regions. These are sacred connections. They are not social connections, but they come from the African Babakongo, you know, repertoire. And that's what you see in the center of the circle. So all these fragments reassemble, and the intermediary form for me is the quadrille, you know, the contradanza and the quadrille. And that is the historical segue from the dances that survive as folkloric expressions. And the quadrille also, you know, all the Caribbean, many nations have the quadrille as their national dances, and the partner dances and solo dances of dance clubs, because it is extremely impossible to imagine a quadrillothèque, you know. capitalism will not allow 16 people to just get up together and just start dancing in a crowded nightclub. So it's a matter also of space, as you say, space and bodies combined together. So there's a lineage, there's a genealogy, but what we see is because dance doesn't remain teleological, it is possible to have all these things operating simultaneously. But the folkloric dances have certainly, those dances we are talking about have certainly been pushed off to survive through patronage of different kinds rather than the capitalist economy, because they simply, there isn't, it's not, they are not, they just don't work, you know, in terms of resources and space and expectations. So that's the way I would answer your question. Of course, I hope that I satisfied you there.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, facing one another. I don't think there's another more direct way of saying I see you, right?
Yeah.
Katrin Pipe is asking, thank you for your passionate talk. I would like to ask you to talk about Alegropolitics and how it relates to Achille Mbembe's necropolitics, which you mentioned several times.
Thank you so much for that. And again, giving me the opportunity to elaborate a little bit on such a key term for me, because the book I'm writing, which I must confess got a bit stymied because I found it very difficult to write about Alegropolitics during the pandemic. But this talk really gives me hope. So thank you for that. It sort of like enables me to crank up the machine again. Alegropolitics for me derived very organically. Madison Moore is here. I am so happy he's also sent a question. Madison was working with me. He was part of my team in the project at King's, Modern Moves, we called it, the project which I referred to, where we did all this work on dance. And as Madison knows, I didn't start out by, this word was not in my head. It came out in the course of my 5 years of work. But Achille Mbembe's work was always important for me, and Necropolitics is the seminal essay of his that we all know, where he uses two iconic figures, the refugee in the camp and the enslaved on the plantation, as two kind of key figures of modernity, on whose bodies this kind of extreme violence, but also extreme, denial of sovereignty has occurred. Right? And then from there, he makes another leap to that which was pretty au courant during the time he was writing this essay, the figure of the terrorist suicide bomber. And he makes this connection between these three figures, therefore, the enslaved on the plantation, the refugee in the camp, and the terrorist suicide bomber, to make an argument about when you have no sovereignty over yourself, the only sovereignty extreme form is taking your own life. You know, your life is in your hands, you detonate your suicide belt. That is, for him, the most clear explanation of necropolitics. So it's really a despondent view of what you can do, you know. It's like, it's a pretty extreme situation if the most radical act you can do to assert your sovereignty is to take your own life. This is doesn't leave us with much hope. However, reading between the lines of that essay, there is some small opening. So, for example, Achille says, the slave on the plantation, he says, had the gestures of self-stylization, but he doesn't go anywhere with that. He says self-stylization. So something like that. It's on page 49. I know that article so well. Between page 47 and 49 is this comment on self-stylization and gesture. And he doesn't do anything more. But in that, I find my opening, okay? So I'm like, that is the gesture, the self-stylization. That is where the swag and the strut arrives. So I do feel that it is possible to find another alternative to this harsh, radical vanishing point of the denial of sovereignty, because people survive and they have to. And this is through the resources of the body, because there's nothing else. So even, when on the Sundays in the plantation, you had one day off, and the enslaved did several things. They would have Sunday dances, or they would cultivate their Creole gardens. This is really, really important. They would not be on the fields. They would do the little garden patches, to grow herbs, vegetables, to do, the mojo hand, the different kinds of sacred and secret medicinal purposes. You would then have a little leftover to sell on the market on your own terms. These were the small moments out of which your own body's resources were generated, generating a different kind of alternative small but necessary sovereignty. So that for me is Alegropolitics. So I have quite a clear, like I have quite this kind of tight connection with necropolitics when I theorize the matter, not just in the words, but in the actual dialogue with Ashil. And he knows that I'm using this in this way. He's okay with it. He likes it. We have had lots of discussions about it. So I hope that, I've already written a couple of articles where I've launched this phrase. So people can go and look it up, the word and my name, and you'll arrive onto whatever's out there in print. But hopefully the book will find shape and form soon as well.
Super. Thank you very much. Madison Moore has a question here for you. Might you speak about how these dance forms have shifted or adapted in light of our current movement of screen-based performance, which I think it takes back to the point you made about what's happening to the dance floor during the pandemic.
Yes. It's so important again, Madison, to bring ourselves up to like the present moment, because yes, we all are having to improvise yet again, okay, now it's in a very bizarre situation because we are improvising in a disembodied form, or so we assume through common sense. We are only connecting virtually, and the partner dance is a very good test case, because while you and I, we can all talk to each other, we don't need to hold each other to talk to each other. In the partner dance, you actually do have to connect, have a physical connection to make the dance work. So this is incredibly frustrating in kind of, wondering how on earth do we do that apart from everything else. So first let me talk about the everything else, and then I'll come to the specificity of the partner dance itself as a one phenomenon in this a massive range of adjustments and improvisations we're having to make because of the screen. So I think one thing I'd say is we've been through, it's a year now, it's coming up to a year of living in this way for all of us, and we have not stopped connecting and communicating, right? We've not given up. Thanks to technology, we've been able to, kind of do at least some reaching out like we're doing indeed right now. And you're hearing my voice and I'm seeing your typed words. So, and this is this sort of like, again, assembled, improvised and assembled mode of fragmented communication is what we are doing most of the time, whether we are on Facebook Live, some people are on the chat, others are, so there's a combination of our digital traces, our vocal, kind of reconstitution of our voices, whatever who can see. Some people are camera on, others camera off. So this is totally improvised. While we might lament and say there is no body in all of this, we're totally disembodied. Another of my former PhD students who Madison knows, of course, because we were all in King's together, Camilo, who has done a very interesting, wonderful PhD on salsa in Colombia and salsa in London. So Camilo reassured me, he said that we are actually just experiencing another form of embodied connection. So of course this is perhaps the kind of optimism of the youth speaking, but I did take it as a cue to say, well, maybe we are actually reassembling parts of our embodiedness to connect to each other. So we are in a new world where we are reconstituting elements of our embodiedness to connect to each other. However, yes, there are limits. For instance, we can't actually reach out and hold each other, right? So what I'm seeing is happening with the partner dance scene in particular. Of course, people's livelihoods are connected with all this, right? So they have to, it's not just a hobby. Some of us, we are dancing as a hobby, but others are doing it as like their livelihood. They need to earn money. I mean, what are they going to do if they don't have dance classes, if they don't have parties, if they cannot DJ? So the DJs were in a better mode. They started DJing fervently on screen and, okay, but who's listening to them? You know what I mean? There has to be a return as well, a response. So people in the first days of the pandemic were DJing and dancing and, whatever, trying to connect. Then it became a bit more systematic. People like the Berlin Salsa Congress organizers have taken a very serious view on what do we do. So there is a kind of whole conversation going on offline, if you like, on whether we can regroup and how safe is it, what are the conditions under which one could dance again. And that is not, however, obviously going on screen. On screen, what's happening is this ability of the partner dance to disassemble from the partner hold and become the group, whether it's the circle or the line dance, is coming into handy now. Because as I said, if you think about the idea that all these dances are spectrums, and in an ideal dance floor, in the ideal moment of gozadera or enjoyment, the good DJ will bring in music that will enable the dancing couples to break up and reconstitute. So we are in unending situation of not being in the partner hold mode, but being in the mode around it, right? And the Zoom screen or the disassemble screen allows people to do their little thing. And so the format, the circle is not so useful because we are not looking at circles on the screen, but the line dance animation becomes quite good because everybody can be in like a line dance, on the screen. And this is really the way in which people have been exploiting technology to simulate a sense of connection on the dance floor through whatever we can do on the screen. And you know that I wrote a small piece on the Jerusalem Dance Challenge, which went viral, my God, on the Conversation Africa. But it's not because of my piece, it's because of the dance. It's a very interesting ripple effect of that actual phenomenon. And you know that while it is a line dance, the dancers are dancers of Semba, which is an Angolan partner dance parallel to, to the Latin American partner dancers. So they can't dance Semba. Neither can they do a dance challenge of Semba. So they're doing a line dance. That's perfectly fine. They do it all the time when they're not, it's natural. So we've kind of hived off historically into that space of dance expression, which exists alongside the partner dance. And that's where the energy is coming from now, with the hope that there will be a reconnection offline safely and so on. And that hope is what keeps us going, right? So that's what I would say. I can report back from the scene, Madison.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kabir. This has been fascinating. Dr. Ananya Kabir is Professor of English Literature at King's College London. Our lecture series has only begun. Next, economic mobility among early 20th century black immigrants with Todd Hamilton, Associate Professor of Sociology at Princeton University. Will take place on March the 30th. Also, tune in this Friday at 6 p.m. for the first event of the Southeastern Texas African and African American Studies Consortium, where we will discuss the history of African and African American studies in Southeastern Texas. Finally, March 4th, C-SPAN and MSNBC commentator Eddie Glaude will talk about the stakes of racial justice and the future of American democracy at the Campbell Lecture on Racial Justice. Learn more at cas.rice.edu. I would like to thank our co-sponsors, the Task Force on Slavery, Segregation, and Racial Injustice, Bridge, Building Research on Inequality and Diversity to Grow Equity, and the School of Humanities. Thanks to Dr. Margarita Castro-Mann for joining us today. Special thanks to our staff working behind the scenes, Tara Ousley, Eric Grenquist, and John Waterhouse. Thank you for joining us today. And on behalf of CAS, I wish you a very good afternoon. And good evening for you there, Doctor.
Thank you all of you. It's been a real pleasure. And I hope to meet you all in person sometime soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.